So the title of this talk is Data Migrations with Django. If you guys aren't familiar, we're going to go over a lot of things, but data migrations with Django are code-based migrations. So they are not typical migrations where you're running a SQL script. They're in-code migrations, and they're heavily paired with the new migrations library that came out with Django. And thanks to Excella Consulting, it's where I work. Special thanks to them. They gave me time to prepare this. So. And then I think I have a little bio about me. So I'm a senior consultant at Excella. I have expertise in Django, Python 2.7 specifically. I have like a Python 3. Configuration management, Ansible, Puppet, and I actually have a certification in Chef. I don't know what the certification is. I think it's like a saucier, or I don't know. They have like special names for these things. And then I have some security specialty. I used to work on continuous monitoring solutions with DoD, and I have like a background in nuclear science, so I kind of dabble in interesting areas. If anyone wants to talk about any of those, we can talk about those later. Now, here's like an overview of what we're going to talk about, and it's not going to start where I wanted to start, which was like right into the data migrations, because the data migrations got to where they are because of the history of Django. So I was going to start this conversation with fixtures and the basics of fixtures, why fixtures were around, why they were the way to get data into the database before migrations came around, data migrations came around, and then when fixtures when fixtures started to break, and we've started to have some of these conversations around here, but there's reasons why why fixtures end up being bad, and now after that I'm going to move into the migration basics. We'll talk about migration basics, then we'll go into data migration specifically, which is a specific type of migration for Django. And then when even those data migrations go bad, and I think I'm going to try and paint the picture to the point when we're at the data migrations, we're going to understand why we talked about the fixtures, because the same problems existed in both those areas. And then I'm going to talk about the dump data command that I feel is missing in Django, and then what I've done to create a solution for that dump command. And that's going to be basically all of it. I haven't timed this out, so we'll see how long it takes. Maybe I'll go like 2 hours long. Maybe I'll finish it. We'll figure it out. And a lot of this is going to be, I feel like when I learn best by making mistakes. So I'm not going to present to you the right way to do things. I'm going to slowly mess up until we get it right. And we're going to do that live here. So this should be fun at least. So this is going to be an actual presentation. All right, so the basics of fixtures. So fixtures are JSON, YAML, or SQL files that can be exported into Django applications. So how many of you have used fixtures at some point to import data? Okay, cool. It used to be, so they're often used for test data sets. That's a really good use case. And they're also a standard for importing static data. So static data meaning data that doesn't change. And there's no data that doesn't change, but this is one way of thinking about it. And importing tables from multiple fixtures worked because DB constraints were turned off. So if you actually go into the source code of Django and you look at the import command, you'll see that it turns off the database constraints before going forward. And that actually has some pretty far-reaching implications that data migrations you're not going to have that same behavior in data migrations. The constraints are turned on while you're importing data with data migrations. And what was the good part about importing fixtures without data constraints is if you exported your entire database and then you imported your entire database, it would work faster without the constraints, but it also didn't have to worry about order, which is a really kind of weird case of well, you should know how to import the data into your database, but sometimes you don't want to worry about it. You just want to dump it and move it back in. And you have to worry about well, this nested relationship, this can't exist until all of these exist. And then if it's only one layer, it's maybe not that hard, but if it's really nested and you have a very complex application, it becomes really hard to track how to control those relationships. So that's the basics of fixtures. We can do some stuff here. So I made a basic, I think I'm scared to type history here, but I started a Django application, a Django project, and I started an app. So this is what the basic structure of this application that we're going to kind of go through looks like. one initial migration, and the only app that it has is the nutrient app. A lot of this started because I was making a website to track, or to create meal plans. So all this kind of came about through that. So this is the example app that I'm using. In this example, we have one model, the nutrient model, and it has just a name in it. And when we, so let's start by activating the most recent virtual environment. So I'm activating this virtual environment, which I've pre-installed different versions of Python, different versions of Django on these guys. So we can do, so this is 110. So I thought it was 11, so I named it 11. But we have 6 installed here, 1.6, 1.7, and then this is a custom one that I made. So let's start with this.
Say going right from that, so I don't read about it. Just put that up like 2 weeks ago.
Right. All right, so let's migrate our database for the first time. So we noticed that it runs the migration, the initial migration that we made. And a lot of you are going to be familiar with this because this is what Django does now. When you add a model, it creates an initial migration. But if you really inspect what this is, a migration is, for the first one, it's initial set to true. This one doesn't have any list of dependencies, but as you add dependencies, it will execute all the migrations in all your apps in a different order, so we can understand the nested relationships. And basically, at the end of the day, all it is this set of operations. And the set of operations are creating models, altering tables, kind of what you would think of, but they're in an agnostic way, so they can be done to any database. And this is the simplest case we have, so let's take a look at that. That's not my real email. Okay, so I set up the admin to show me what I've created already. And we're going to take a look at, okay. So we want to add some nutrients. Let's add carbs, fat, protein. Okay. So when somebody is running your Django app for the first time, you basically want to give them 2 commands to make it work. And I think that's pretty standard. It's very strange to have a list of things that you have to do. You have your prerequisites, like things you have to have installed already. But in general, if I hand somebody an app for the first time, they should just have to migrate and run server. And there's other ways to get data into the data that you need to operate your app in the database. But data migrations, fixtures, and then maybe custom management commands are the way that people have done them. I don't know if you guys have other ways that you've done. But those are the ways I've seen very common. The problem with the management commands is it's strange to have someone run a custom command that you wrote to run your app for the first time. And the problem with fixtures is they don't automatically load it. So it used to be I could run migrate and it would install my fixtures every time. So actually let's...
They refresh that in time, I think.
What's that?
They stopped doing that in time.
Yeah, at some point. I'm not sure if it was dump data. Nutrient. So the dump data command exports your database or the apps inside your database, the models inside your database. And you can specify the tables, you can do this as granular as you want. Puts it to standard out. So let's go ahead and put that into nutrients. Fixtures. Initial data.json. Okay. So to load this data back in is the load data command. So this used to be run in every version. I think we could go back. Let's try. Yes, I think that's why I have 6. Plus. All right. So this is giving me some type of angry message because it is trying to load the,
I'm trying to create tables.
it's trying to create the tables, but the table should be there already. So let's go to this one. So this is Django-1.6 that we're operating on, and it's asking me if we want to create a user. This is something that also has gone away. And it loads the fixtures automatically. So let's look at our database again. So in Django 1.6, we see that we at least have the automatic loading of fixtures. Source 7 and activate. In Django 1.7, we are not loading our fixtures automatically. So since Django 1.7, we're no longer loading our fixtures automatically, and that creates a certain problem. Why aren't our fixtures loading automatically? They're not loading automatically because they're not really the suggested way to import data now. They still have different ways. You can still load data, and you can still like use it as your test fixtures, but it's just not the recommended way. So they have a recommended way of getting data into the database, and it's called a data migration. Let's go ahead. So another point about fixtures that I really wanted to hammer home is these fixtures are great. They'll import the data, but the problem was whenever your schema changed, you would not be able to re-import that data because the fixtures are so specific to the schema that it wouldn't work. So let's take a look at one of these. Model, primary keys. So it's going down to the primary keys. It's literally not allowing you, when you're importing data, to have a naturally occurring primary key value. It's saying this primary key, this in the audit, whatever that is, whatever database you're using, it's going to have the value of 1. And that's actually really important. When you're doing something like that, it means that your foreign key relationships won't mess up. If you don't do something like disable the constraints and then import the explicit, primary key foreign key relationships, then things will get out of sync. So they had like reasons why they chose to do this. The name, the fields, name, carbs. So if we add another field to this, it's not going to be in here, and the imports are going to fail. So let's take a look at that really quick. So I'm adding a field. All right, do you guys want to provide a one-off default now, or add a default in the table?
Add a default.
Okay. The default will be okay. So we can run our migrations, but let's try and remove the database, migrate the whole app again, and then load the data. Okay, so this one worked. So why did this one work? That's a really strange case. We're running. Sorry, go ahead.
You put a default value with it, because it's a non-nullable field.
Yeah, it's a char field.
It's a char field. It's a char field, and it has a default value here. Now the question is, would this be the same in SQLite and MySQL? Does anyone know the answer to that? Okay, cool. I didn't, so you're saying the answer is that in MySQL it's going to behave the exact same way. Yeah. Okay. Let's try and add a different field and then try the migrations. So if we have an integer field, what should we have a default value be able to be inserted in this case? Let's check.
That was
So even if we specify a one-off value for a
it's
default
migration on the data level. That would be the picture.
Okay. Okay. So there's a problem installing this fixture. Why is there a problem installing this fixture and not?
You
Sorry.
need to migrate first.
That's
As a tape for the
Thank you. Alright. So we violated a not-null constraint, which makes more sense than the other table instances. So why are we getting this problem? It's because we have a mismatch between our fixture and the constraints that are imposed in our database. I actually, wasn't sure. I'll check this, and then we can talk about it. But I thought that the SQLite, since it doesn't actually enforce constraints, would behave differently than MySQL.
Not for something nullable like that.
Not for the nullable. For the char fields, they'll behave differently.
Right, it's just an empty string. So like it's asking you as a convenience for the char field for a string literal, but you could have put empty string and it would have make sense. Whereas
Cool. All right, cool. That's interesting. Yeah.
I have a question. What if I have some image data and I want to load in like this? What would you recommend? How would I go about it?
For loading image data into a database?
Yes. And a huge, folder or gigabytes of image
Are
data.
you loading blobs? Like, how are you loading images into a database?
I'm open for recommendation.
I would recommend not to do that.
no SQL.
Like, even for most, yeah, you could so actually, tons of things you could do. And a lot of them I've done, and I would not recommend them. So I would recommend putting your image, do you have like some reason why you're trying to load images into a database as opposed to like somewhere like S3 or somewhere where you can get them later in a more sane manner?
Yeah, so then the issue will become relating those images with a path and storing that path into database.
Okay.
So either way, I'm trying to automate that process
Okay.
because I don't have, so I don't know the integrity of the files names of the image files. Maybe all of them are img001 or whatever. So that's why I was trying to load into database.
Okay, there might be someone who knows more about this. But
Yeah.
there are definitely some third-party apps available where it will automatically upload it to S3, rename it into some like SHA. You can give it a format that you want.
Okay.
And like all.
We can chat after.
Yeah,
So
okay,
there's
sorry.
Django storages and S3 Direct. There are two third-party packages that actually.
Alright.
Which one you said? Django?
Django storages
Storage,
for the local
okay.
side, and then if you want to do direct uploads to S3, there's S3 Direct.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
sounds
and then you
good.
just put your bucket S3 credentials.
Yeah.
And, don't check them into source control.
Or do.
Or do. Just let me know.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Yeah, so this is basically what we get, the behavior we get, is our schema changes, then we have to redump our data. And it's not that annoying, but it does impact us in like a very, in a very peculiar way. And one of the things that's like particularly villainous about this is that it doesn't present itself when you're doing development. It kind of seems like it goes along normally, like everything's hunky-dory, until someone starts the project again and tries to load the data again. So this is one of these problems where it's like, it's not broken for me, but you actually end up breaking it for everybody else who's starting the project again. And so this is one of those things where it's like, it's good to know about this. This is why fixtures aren't the best, is because the schema changes. So let's look at the data migrations and how they handle this. Let's use a more recent version. So I'm going to delete our database, and we're not going to use the. We're not going to use the fixtures anymore. We're going to start using migrations. Let's get up to date. Okay. To clear everything out, since we started there, we're not going to load the data. We're going to create an empty migration. So create migration. Yeah. And we give it the app name and the flag empty. Okay. So what did this give us? We can look here, and it is a migration that does nothing. You apply it, and then it's done. So it's not very useful the way that it's set up, but we'll make another one to show you how to do it. Okay. Here, and let's cheat. So I've never memorized this, so
Give it a function node.
Migrations have like a runnable. So our migration is a set of operations. One of them can be Python runnable. This has several parameters. Like the default is just one function that is your going forward function, but it also has like going backward functions so that you can make it fully compatible. And it gets added as a dependency for like the latest migration. So this is going to be our thing that supports these things. Let's start with making a mistake. From nutrient models import nutrient dot actually calories. Okay. So who knows what's wrong with this? And I deleted the part of the documentation that told you what was wrong with it. So does anyone know what's wrong with this?
You have to get that from apps first.
Okay, so I imported this directly from my nutrient models. My nutrient.models nutrient object is going to exactly match my code. I'm literally importing the code. And this migration is a state, could it possibly have a state change? So I can add a column, I can remove a column, and Django behind the scenes, if it's pulling in things, it will have a problem if the columns that it thinks should exist don't exist, or there are extra columns. So it will get angry, and this is something that this is another problem where it's like, this is subtle because everywhere else you do Django, you do exactly this import command, but you cannot use this import command here. You actually have to do this app.get.
And the worst thing is, to your point earlier about...
you never know that it's broken
won't know until
you broke it for everyone else. Right? So there's a couple things that can go wrong with this scenario. It's like, it will go, so most of the time, it actually might work for a long time. It might work for months. It might work for a year. Because this app, this model might not change. When it does change, and then someone else does the migration, your break will be in there a year ago. So it's just kind of one of those things that's very, very hard to like realize that you're breaking things. But in the documentation, it does tell you not to do this. So let's go ahead and do it. Let's just jump in this shell to see if we actually did it. All right, so we get our 1 calorie object, and this is our data migration, which is actually adding our thing in. And this is great. Like this is the not so subtle point is that this apps.get model is going to get the model at the specific database state as the migrations are going along. So this won't break when we add a new schema. If we have a migration later that adds a new column, that column will, and during that migration, will decide what to do with that new value. This prevents you from like breaking in here. Yeah.
I didn't really understand the explanation for why nutrient.models import nutrient was important.
Okay, so let's do this then. Let's import it like that. Does anyone know how I can delete the last migration in the database? The easiest way. I would normally drop into my SQL, but I'm using SQLite.
Do you want to regress it, or you just want to delete it from the progression?
managed by what?
migrate, and then your app name,
So I have to be in the console. Migrate,
and then your app name,
nutrient.
and then you want to put the migration name you want to go back to.
So 004.
004, so I just copied that one.
You can just do a partial, I think, it'll resolve it.
Okay. Not reverse.
Oh.
That
But
makes
you didn't
sense.
do a backwards code.
Yes, okay. Let's just get basic about this thing.
We can make another one and just break it.